Terry Ann Shebet in our Nairobi office brings us a special interview with Paul Kegame, President of Rwanda.
Welcome to this special interview with His Excellency President Paul Kegame of Rwanda. Rwanda has come a long way since the tragic events of 1994 that saw the country rent apart by civil war. It is now rebuilding its economy at an average annual rate of 7% as it seeks to find its place alongside the bigger neighbors across the East African region. As we head towards a common market, Rwanda is also heading for elections in July. Recently, I spent some time in Rwanda and spoke with President Kagame. Now, we're in a post-recession era, yet Rwanda continues to post above average growth of GDP. In 2008, your country grew by 11%. 2009, it was at 5.5% when the rest of the world was slowing down. 2010, it is estimated that it will grow at about 7%. What is your growth strategy that other small and post-war African countries can apply from the Rwandese experience?
I don't think there is, or I should say that there is something we have invented that doesn't exist or didn't exist. But there are certain factors that have been favoring us, and that also combines with a lot of efforts we have put into making things happen. Well, for example, if you look at our agriculture all along had a huge potential which had never been tapped into or realized. And what we've done, we've concentrated on investing in agriculture, in new technologies, in new variety of seeds, in providing fertilizer to the farmers and extension services and educating the farmers. And of course, that means also that, as we know, agriculture covers a very big percentage of our economy and involves a huge population. So this was an untapped resource that we have now come to concentrate on, and we've seen huge growth in that area, which has continued to drive the growth overall of our economy. But that's not the only area. The other area we've been looking at and have again paid attention, sufficient attention to continuing to grow our tourism. Tourism in our country has a huge potential. Again, this was an area that not so much had been done in the many previous years. So we concentrated on ensuring that tourism continues to grow. And we've seen it continue to grow even during this period of recession. We didn't register so much downward trend as probably some other people experienced. And for example, what differentiated us from other areas, in area of tourism, we focused on high-end tourism. And these people who have disposable incomes of a certain volume continued to come to our country, and we continued to grow the services in that area and provide different variety, still looking at the high-end aspect of it. And the strategy has worked for us as such. We've continued to invest in infrastructure which has provided employment to our people. We were interested mainly in building roads. Housing here has been, the demand has been high and the supply has continued to grow as well. And this has fed into this growth of our economy.
Now, analysts drew close similarities between your strategies here and what happened in Singapore, from third world to first. Is that a model that you have followed, and is that something you're keen to follow? I've heard about some of the projects that you have, such as one cow per home, which is probably something that other African states could learn from. What can you tell us about that?
We've certainly admired and followed very closely the models of development that led to Singapore being where it is today. and even looked at what is happening in other parts of Southeastern Asia, like even in South Korea. And these are people we are working with also. Yes, and as you rightly said, there are simple things, but that are very effective, like this project indeed, where you focus on the activity that would involve every individual family in Rwanda. If you provide, as we did and have continued to do, and we've seen the benefits of it, say, for example, providing a cow to every poor family. And we've seen how over the years this has transformed this family's kind of living, if you will.
Let's talk about what is now being referred to as the second phase of your development. Of course, Rwanda has been lauded for post-war reconstruction, but it seems the second phase is being marked by a lot more agrarian development as well as ICT, which is something that seems to be very close to your heart. But there needs to be a higher push, of course, for industrial capacity. What is your strategy and vision for ICT in this country?
Before I come to that, quickly, certainly, when we are talking about agriculture in Rwanda, small country and huge population, Rwanda is now 11 million people in a very small space, you know, and therefore not so much land for agriculture. So much as we know we had huge potential in agriculture that hasn't been realized, we also knew the limitation with agriculture, and compared to other countries that are of great size and have huge land and sometimes small populations, that means this land can be used, you know, without limit in production. So, but at the same time, we thought we needed to cover this gap that there is in realizing the ultimate, you know, point of this potential. The biggest part of our national budget really goes into education and health. But in education, we have to target a number of things. We don't exclude anything. Education is education, and it's a good thing, no question about it overall. But in our case, for that process of industrialization, which we won't even probably talk so much about here, because we are more or less looking, we are looking at a knowledge-based economy that we want to achieve ultimately.
Let's look at the private sector, and we've seen within the past few years, at least within the East African region, the private sector has played a leading role in turning around the East African economies. How's the private sector environment here, and how much are they actually contributing to the growth of the economy?
We've seen, like in many other sectors, the private sector continue to grow. And as we say all this, I have to remind people that we have really started everything from a very low base. From 94, it was total devastation in this country. So we had to start from scratch and start building, including the private sector. Really, it started from a very low base, but has been continuing to grow. And it has also continued to grow not only based on its own efforts, but the efforts that have brought government and the private sector to work together in partnership to make sure that this growth, because there is a lot that government can do to facilitate that growth, and then the private sector itself has to do a lot in terms of its own growth. So there has been a lot of reforms going on, a lot of education, as we said, a lot of looking at really what is it that can boost this growth, as well as bring in the investments and then put in regulations, we put in the incentives of all different kinds to make sure that this growth has a clear future. So, but as you may know, the private sector in most cases has moved ahead of the public sector, if you will. While governments and countries between them get lost in some of, bureaucratic processes and other considerations, and so much politics about really nothing to do much with business. Mm-hmm. The business people have always, even in a crisis, in a conflict, they continue doing business. Mm-hmm. It's their survival. It's also something that they've done over the years, and they know what this means. If you are to grow a business, if the private sector is continue to grow, there has to be synergies and working together and interdependency and buying and selling and demands and supplies, So people depend more on each other, and they realize that than in just politics.
Now, still talking about deepening of the economy, recently your country has been moved from highly indebted poor country status to policy support initiatives by the IMF, quite a laudable move, for the rest of East Africa, we must say. But what's being done to develop the capital markets and the lending environment, both to government as well as business?
Yes, that has been an area that has created some difficulties. Again, really depending on where we started from. But we have continued to see our capital market, which has started only recently and very young, continue to grow. And in fact, even where we are constrained with the people who had the knowledge and the skills to do that, we have benefited from the skills in the region, flowing in and people supporting that growth. But not only that, we are not only looking at the growth of our capital markets, we are also looking at how that can benefit from the regional activities to the point that maybe even in the near future we should be seeing the East African community more or less in the sense of that being one country where the capital markets are so well integrated and again, building on synergy, we can or benefit. So it has created these difficulties. Of course, then, in our financial markets, if you look at what happens in the lending of the banks, you find they really look at short-term rather than long-term, and we've been grappling with that problem. So, but we have also been addressing it by finding sources of finance that can facilitate the banks and other institutions to be able to give long-term loans rather than always focusing on short-term ones. And this again has been facilitated through different partnerships we have had and being able to access the kind of finance that our institutions could base on to be able to do that. For on the side of policy, there hasn't been very much in terms of problems. We haven't had problems with that. We have seen more problems in the area of facilitating, in a practical sense, that to happen by providing such resources.
You've talked about the East African community, and of course that is a pet subject of almost everybody who's keen on the growth of East Africa. Now there's been debates about the hegemony of Kenya and Uganda being the larger economies, that when the integration finally happens, that it is those economies that may benefit more. What do you say from your point of view for a country such as yours and Burundi, which are the newer members? Do you feel that there's a reason to protect Rwanda's business?
No, to protect business against what? Because in any case, by being big economies, it means they're already benefiting more than you are actually benefiting. So even if you left the status quo, you would still be where you are. And probably you would continue to be constrained as you are. But of course, I don't want to downplay the concerns people may have in this. And that's why in any arrangement like that one of integration, you want to listen to these concerns. And therefore, in the many formulas you may use to have countries come together in this form of integration, you want to look at how you can deal with this imbalance. And so to speak, you may even look at ways of compensation, or allowing people a certain room and certain space to be able, to fit in properly in this integration process without them feeling that they are losing out and benefiting others but not themselves. No question about it. And this discussion has been going on. There has been looking at even case by case. What do you lose by this process of integration in this area? What do you gain more than the other? And how can we, share the burden and, create a more balanced situation than if we just moved straight into that without any consideration. So this has been discussed over and over, and people's fears have always been allayed by these compensation mechanisms and other considerations, or giving certain countries more time to sort out a number of things, and it has happened this way. But we are still better off going through this process, even identifying difficulties and finding answers for them, and going ahead with the integration, than just falling back and say, no, Kenya is a bigger economy than myself. If I go to them, you first have to look at where you are in the first place, even before you join such a community that you think will. And then you will find you gain here, you give there, you lose there a bit, and the other ones. So as long as it is balanced, then you level the ground and make sure that in the end, people are really competing on a much level ground.
Still staying with the East African community, it is ironic that the three biggest countries in Africa are grappling with energy issues. Kenya has just come out of a drought and was relying on emergency power. Is Rwanda ready to use its advantage of Lake Kivu and new hydropower projects to tap into the regional grid and provide energy solutions to this, at least East African member states?
Absolutely. There have been problems in the whole region, and in fact even beyond. The whole continent almost has a huge power deficit. Yet we have huge resources that we could invest in and actually solve these problems. If you look at the potential there is in this whole region, it means we just need to do certain things right and we solve the problem. But of course always the constraint is the financing of such projects, which involve huge sums of money. So, but again, there are ways also to deal with that. Of late, there have been international institutions and different sources of this kind of finance, and there is interest also in helping countries, supporting countries to actually deal with these issues. So in the case of Rwanda, indeed, yes, we've already started a process. In fact, we are looking at how we can exploit methane gas under Lake Kivu for production of electricity. And also looking at how we can even do that with our neighbors, especially the Democratic Republic of Congo, who are our neighbors and actually with whom we share the lake and ultimately this resource that is under the lake.
Finally, Your Excellency, you've been referred to as a visionary leader, but your critics also say that you're non-democratic. As you go into polls in July, are you taking some of that criticism on board?
Well, you wouldn't be non-democratic and then go for elections. Well, that's one thing. The second is, I think the critics we talk about are more from outside than from Rwanda. I think if you study carefully our case, if you move around, if you ask anybody at different levels, you'll probably have 9 out of 10 telling you they are happy. They are happy with their country, with what we are doing, all of us, what the progress we are making in all areas of governance, democratic processes, economic activities and growth and transformation, the social transformation. Well, for me, based on that, I feel more satisfied that we are doing a good job together as a country. And again, the results will speak for themselves. You may hear insults, people may criticize unfairly. We will live with that. But at the same time, if we see what is happening in the country and the way it is moving fast and forward in every area, for me, that is my satisfaction. Maybe criticisms will always be there, unfair, fair, and it will be, I don't know of any place that if you wanted to criticize, you wouldn't criticize. I don't know of any place in this world. So, but I think we have to stay the course. We have to remain focused on the real issues of our development. We have to remain focused on making the difference for our people and how they can make a difference for themselves in all areas, including those of, democracy, their rights, which, by the way, also, when I talk of rights, I think social and economically there are those rights that if we empower people to have a decent living and be able to put food on their table, I think this is a question of right. And if we enable them to do that themselves and not to be fed all the time and given handouts and restore their dignity, I think there is no better right. And I think that's what we are doing. And if I'm to be criticized for that as the leader of this country, or if our people are to be criticized for that, so be it.